I still remember the night I first found myself standing outside that mysterious bar with Zane. A hazy yellow light illuminated the old wooden sign that simply read "Bar," and the music streaming out had a low, pulsing beat that made my heart pound. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and dread. Turning from the door, I glanced at Zane, my longtime friend. "Zane," I whispered, swallowing nervously, "what kind of place is this?" He looked at me with a mischievous smile playing on his lips. That smile, under ordinary circumstances, might have reassured me. He had always been the confident one after all, but here it made me uneasy. "Come inside," he replied, "and you'll understand it all for yourself." His tone was casual, as though he were inviting me to a normal coffee shop rather than an ominous, neon-lit establishment in a part of the city I'd never been to before. I hesitated. My upbringing told me I didn't belong in a place like this, and my heart hammered in my chest with pure anxiety. "Zane, at least tell me why we're here. What am I supposed to do?" I asked in a hushed voice, trying not to be overheard by the small group of people standing further along the sidewalk. Zane rested a friendly hand on my shoulder and sighed. "Look, you're fed up with your life at home," he explained gently, but there was a glint in his eye, as if he were delighted to finally reveal this secret to me. "It's impossible for you to manage everything on your current salary. Your father's medicines, your family's household bills, the little emergencies that come up week after week. Didn't you say you wished there was some shortcut, some quick way to solve your endless problems?" The mention of my father's medical needs sent a pang of guilt through me. My father had worked honest jobs all his life, barely earning enough to keep our small family afloat, and I knew that paying for his medications now fell largely on me. "Yes, I did say that," I mumbled. I had, in moments of desperation, admitted to Zane that my meager salary just wasn't enough. But my imagination had never conjured up a solution like this. I glanced at that bar sign again, confused as to how a dimly lit place full of loud music, cigarette smoke, and strangers could possibly be the key to my financial salvation. Zane, though, seemed utterly at ease. He had always been the free-spirited, risk-taking one. During our college days, he spoke often about not wanting to remain poor and how one day he would change his destiny. I just never imagined his path would include such strange places or secret dealings. "Trust me," he said, voice low but insistent. "This is exactly the sort of shortcut you've been dreaming about. Do you think I got rich overnight just by chance?" I remembered how he had transformed his life in a suspiciously short time. Not too long ago, Zane was just like me. Overworked, underpaid, and constantly worried about the next month's rent. Suddenly, he was wearing expensive clothes, driving a brand new car, and flashing wads of money as though it were nothing. My curiosity and my desperation, more than anything else, lured me inside with him that night. The interior of the bar was dimly lit by colored lights that spun lazily on the ceiling. A thick haze of cigarette smoke lingered around the patrons who stood and swayed to a pulsating beat. Immediately, I noticed something that made me blush. Many middle-aged and even older women were dancing right next to much younger men, some of whom looked barely out of their teens. It was difficult to see clearly through the lights and haze, but it was clear that these women were far older than the men twirling them around. I felt my cheeks burn with shame, partly because I'd never seen such a scene in real life, and partly because I couldn't imagine what role I had here. I ducked my head, trying to hide how uncomfortable I was. That was when Zane leaned in close, whispering, "Look at all these young men. You're probably thinking they're spoiled heirs. Actually, they're just like you, people who need money and have no other clear path." His words came as a shock. I had assumed these guys were wealthy brats, eager for cheap thrills. Now I realized, based on Zane's tone, that they weren't necessarily from rich families at all. If they were like me, maybe they'd also been cornered by desperate financial realities. Zane insisted I keep my eyes open and observe everything without making a scene. He left me sitting at one of the worn-out bar stools near a corner table. My pulse quickened as I scanned the crowd. That was when Zane approached an older woman, somewhere in her late 50s or early 60s, who was wearing a tight, revealing dress and a heavy layer of makeup. She looked so out of place to me, like someone who might have once been elegant, but had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and was now lost in loud music and cheap perfume. She turned her head when Zane gestured in my direction, and I felt my stomach twist. She gave me a sly, appraising look, as though I were some item on display for potential purchase. My throat went dry. Zane, noticing how petrified I looked, came back, grabbed my arm and murmured, "Come on. Don't overthink it." I must have stammered some protest, saying I wanted to leave, that I had no interest in dancing with an older woman, but Zane was firm, pulling me along by the hand. Before I realized what was happening, I found myself in a small, private room at the back of the bar. The lights in there were even dimmer, and a battered old couch stood against the wall. Zane winked at me, and before I could say anything, he shut the door, leaving me alone with that woman. She walked slowly toward me, each step measured, until she was close enough that I could smell the strong perfume clinging to her dress. It was a cloying, heady scent that made my senses reel. Raising a perfectly manicured hand, she reached up to touch my cheek. Her voice was oddly gentle as she said, "My, you're a truly beautiful young man. I have a weakness for men like you, so fresh, so handsome." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My entire body was rigid with tension. Meanwhile, she seemed amused by how frightened I was. She took another step, pressing closer. It was as though everything were happening in slow motion. My moral instincts cried out that this was wrong. I couldn't do this. I thought of my father, reliant on me for medicines. I thought of my mother, who trusted me to do the right thing. Yet the woman's perfume, the strange hush of the private room, and the memory of my own money problems twisted my thoughts. Sensing my confusion, she spoke in a low, coaxing voice. "Is this your first time alone with a woman?" I nodded, cheeks burning. She laughed softly. "No need to worry. I'll teach you everything." At that moment, she made a demand I never expected to hear. The directness of it left my mind reeling. A woman old enough to be my mother, or even my grandmother, was propositioning me for intimacy. My mouth fell open in shock. She noticed my expression and smirked. "I'm not asking you to do this for free," she assured me. "I'll pay you, more than I pay Zane if you please me. Name your price, and we'll see how well you do." That reference to money made me remember all the bills piling up at home. Rent overdue, the electricity bill that could swallow my salary whole, my father's expensive medications, and my younger siblings' school fees. Without giving me too much time to think, the older woman stepped forward and touched my face again, trailing her fingertips down my arm. In a daze, I found myself swept into her hold. Despite my objections, some scattered words about sin, morality, how this was all wrong, she only gave a breathless laugh, as though my protestations excited her more. Overcome by a mixture of fear, confusion, and my own physical reactions, I surrendered to her will. 2 hours passed like that. When it was over and I stumbled out of the room, exhausted and humiliated, Zane was waiting. He threw me an almost triumphant grin as though to say, "See? I told you." I felt my face burn with shame. Before I could hurry away, the woman approached, pressing a thick bundle of cash into my hand. "Come to my house every day," she told me in a husky whisper. "I'll pay you just as much each time. In fact, I'll give you whatever you ask for. Don't forget that." She slipped away into the murky depths of the bar, leaving me trembling and confused. I stood there, staring down at the money. I could not believe that in just 2 hours, I was holding more cash than I usually made in several months. But it was money earned in what I could only call a sinful way. Part of me was revolted. How could I, an able-bodied man, sink to this? But desperation overshadowed my shame. That money alone could settle our overdue bills at home. That money was exactly the amount my father's treatments cost for a month. That money meant I could buy groceries for the family without having to borrow from anyone. Torn between revulsion and relief, I found my hand gripping that wad of cash tightly. Initially I felt dirty. But as the days passed and my mother's amazed and worried face kept asking, "Where did you get this money?" I found myself taking yet another step down that dark road. Part of me rationalized it. Just a few times, enough to get us over this crisis. Another part whispered that I should do whatever it took to keep my father alive and my family from drowning in debt. My mother's confusion was understandable. We had always struggled financially, yet now I was walking around paying bills as though money weren't a concern. She questioned me directly. "You're not doing anything wrong, are you, son?" But I lied. Told her I'd found a part-time job, one that paid extraordinarily well. That's how I slid deeper into the same pattern Zane had been in for a while. At first, it was only that one older woman. She liked me, or so she claimed. She paid me daily whenever I visited her house. She was wealthy in her own right and apparently lonely, so she indulged in my company. Even though the situation felt wrong, I was losing my aversion to it. The house itself was large and furnished extravagantly, with old-style carved wood tables and upholstered chairs. She had a fondness for heavy scents, even burning incense that clung to the drapes. I would arrive nervous, yet each time she welcomed me eagerly, pressing more money upon me afterward. She even insisted I should ask for additional gifts if I wanted. Once she gave me an expensive watch out of nowhere, saying it suited me better than the older watch I owned. I told myself I could keep my conscience quiet. After all, I was solving immediate financial problems for my family. Our rented house was now paid up for months in advance, my father's prescriptions and doctor visits were covered, my younger siblings continued in school without the constant threat of expulsion for late fees, and we finally had groceries in the fridge without me needing to count every coin. My mother was astounded at how quickly our life had improved, but still uneasy about the sudden flow of money. I pretended a casual confidence. "I'm doing part-time work, Ma," I would say. "It's just a really good opportunity, and it's not permanent." She eyed me suspiciously, but she also wanted to believe that I'd simply found a lucky break. However, inside my head, guilt grew heavier. The cycle of guilt and greed tormented me. Sometimes I knelt down to pray and felt so unworthy, but then a voice in my head would tell me that I had no choice. "It's only for a while," I told myself. "Once things stabilize, you can stop." But life rarely goes the way we plan, and the more money I earned, the more I craved it. In no time, I was depositing large sums into my bank account. I sold my motorbike and bought a small used car. That was a dream I'd never thought possible in my meager situation. I also began upgrading things around the house. Fixing leaks, repainting walls, buying better furniture. My father didn't ask questions because he was occupied with his own health struggles, and he seemed genuinely happy that I could pay for everything so easily. My mother, however, could not help being suspicious and asked, "You're sure you're not involved in anything illegal?" Each time I came home late. I kept denying it, growing more adept at lying. What weighed on me the most was that Zane had effectively introduced me to this world. He was an old college friend who, during our school days, was just as poor as I was. We used to do the same routine: study by day, work by night at some store or gas station, scraping enough for tuition and contributing a bit at home. He was often frustrated about how life seemed stacked against us. Meanwhile, I tried to keep my faith in God and accept my lot patiently. Eventually, after college, I lost touch with Zane. I found a decent job at a mid-level company, working 9 to 5. My salary wasn't huge, but it kept our house going, especially since my father was still working at that time. Then everything changed. My father was struck by a stroke. Medical bills piled up. My mother was diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure. She needed regular checkups, medication, and special dietary considerations. Inflation soared. Suddenly, the modest salary I'd once found sufficient was nowhere near enough. That was when I ran into Zane again by what I thought was chance, sitting on a sidewalk with my head in my hands, worrying about everything. The Zane I met that day was unrecognizable from the friend I remembered. He wore designer clothes, had a fancy car parked nearby, and carried himself with the confident air of a man who had no money problems at all. I asked him point-blank how he had managed to transform his life, and he promised to show me. That was how I ended up in that bar. And that was how it all began for me. In the months that followed, I realized Zayn was involved with many older women, widows, divorcees, or simply wealthy women looking for companionship. He was being paid handsomely by each of them. He proudly admitted how he juggled their schedules, meeting one in the morning, another in the evening, someone else at night, never mixing them up. I listened in disbelief, but the more I saw the tangible proof of his wealth, the more I was drawn in. Yet, for my own reasons, I chose to stay with just one woman at first, the first older woman who had approached me so boldly. Over time, though, I ended up with someone else. Samina. Samina was in her 40s, not quite as old as the woman from the bar, but still almost double my age. Her husband, a wealthy businessman, had passed away a few years earlier, leaving her a luxurious mansion, a large bank balance, and valuable properties. She had no children to inherit all of, which made her lonely. She had started drinking, throwing lavish parties, and seeking out young men for fun. By the time I met her, she seemed happy to shower me with money and gifts. I had never been with anyone as wealthy. She even made the first move, flirting in a way that left me speechless. Within a short while, she was fulfilling my every desire and paying me enough to handle everything at home without worry. But Samina did more than just pay me. She began to profess love. One day she said quite bluntly, "I can't live without you. Why don't you marry me?" My heart kicked against my ribs. I thought it must be a joke. Marry a woman so much older than me. My mother had always imagined I'd eventually marry a girl near my age, someone from a respectable family. For an instant, I pictured my mother's outraged face. But at the same time, Samina's words floated enticingly in front of me. If I married her, all her riches would eventually become mine. Even though she was older, and I knew she'd been with other men before me, a greedy voice inside urged me to consider it. She was unbelievably wealthy. I reasoned that she might not live very long, or at least that's what I told myself in a moment of moral weakness. If I spent some years with her, she could pass away, and I would be free, a wealthy young widower. The plan, in my mind, was to have everything I ever wanted without working the rest of my life in menial jobs. It was an ugly, selfish thought, but greed had taken root by then. When I shared this plan with my parents, they were horrified. My mother's eyes, wide with shock, spoke volumes. "Have you lost your mind?" she exclaimed. "You should die of shame before even considering such a thing. How can you marry a woman old enough to be your mother?" My father, too, was stunned, though his health problems left him with limited energy to argue. My mother tried everything she could. She scolded, threatened, even said she wouldn't forgive me for betraying the values they'd raised me with. But I refused to bend. My mind was fixated on the future. A big house, fancy cars, plenty of money, no more nights lying awake dreading how to pay the bills. I told her, "I want to live my life on my terms. Shouldn't you be happy that I'm finally getting money without struggling day and night?" My mother's face fell. "Shame on such wealth," she spat, "if it forces you to sell your soul. Do you think your father and I raised you so you'd become a toy for a woman your mother's age? You forget that we always fed you with honest money. This is unclean, can't you see it?" Her words stung, but I pushed them aside. Samina offered me a golden cage, and in my desperation, I was willing to lock myself inside it. That's how, against my parents' wishes, I went through with it. I married Samina. She was thrilled, and I moved into her sprawling mansion. My parents were so upset that they barely spoke to me afterward. Occasionally, I would visit them out of guilt, but the visits were awkward. They couldn't meet my eyes, and I avoided theirs. At that point, I was too entrenched in my grand new life to turn back. On our wedding night, I tried my best to be the charming, doting husband. I gifted her a beautiful ring, a face-revealing present, as tradition sometimes dictates. She, in return, handed me a small packet. I recognized it as some kind of performance-enhancing pill. She said with a teasing smile, "Take this. I want tonight to be unforgettable." Thinking only of pleasing her, I swallowed it with a glass of milk. True to her word, that night was wild and intense. I felt stronger than usual, riding a wave of artificial energy. In the days that followed, Samina would ask me to keep taking the pills. Every second or third day, she wanted me to replicate that vigor. First, it seemed harmless. I was still young, and the pills appeared to boost my stamina. But eventually I started feeling a strange weakness in my body, as though these pills were draining some deeper life force from me. I noticed my hands shaking slightly when I tried to hold a cup of tea in the morning. Sometimes my heart would race unpredictably, or I'd feel dizzy. I hid these symptoms from Samina, because I knew her temperament. She was a passionate, sensual woman who married me to satisfy those appetites. If she sensed that I was growing weak or impotent, it might anger her. Also, if she cast me out, I'd lose all the luxuries that had become my daily reality. With each passing week, though, my body felt more worn, as though I were aging far too quickly. I started making excuses to avoid her, sometimes sleeping over at my parents' house and claiming my father was very ill, sometimes saying I worked late at the office. But Samina was no fool. She sensed my distance and grew irritable, demanding more attention and fun. One day, a friend who suspected my situation nudged me to see a local herbalist for help. He gave me a concoction meant to restore vitality, but it only made matters worse, leaving me weaker and more anxious. Eventually, it reached a breaking point. I realized I could barely fulfill my duties as a husband, and this terrified me. My shame was so great that I couldn't confide in Samina. Instead, I went to a proper doctor in secrecy, explained my situation through choked sobs, and admitted to taking unknown pills. He asked me to bring the medication for him to examine. When I did, he was appalled. He said, "This is a banned drug. It's extremely harmful, especially in repeated doses. You're lucky you haven't collapsed. I'm afraid your wife's need for intense pleasure has turned you into someone who can't function without these pills. And even then, they're destroying your health. If you want to recover, you'll need a long, careful treatment." My heart sank. I had wanted a quick fix, some medication to restore my former self, but now I was facing months, maybe years, of therapy, special diets, and rest. I felt a desperate desire to hide the truth from Samina, though. I still feared losing this lavish lifestyle. But my plan to remain silent collapsed that very night. I tried to dodge her advances again, feigning exhaustion, only for her to explode in rage. "Do you think I married you to watch you sleep every night?" she demanded. "You're not here to lounge around in my house and spend my money. Do what you're supposed to do as my husband." Feeling helpless, I finally confessed some of the truth, pleading with her to be patient while I recovered. "It's your fault," I said bitterly. "You made me take these pills over and over. I can't perform anymore. I need proper care now, or I might never be healthy again. The doctor said there's hope, but it'll take time." Samina refused to accept any responsibility. She was blinded by anger and desire. "If I'd known you were a worthless man, I would never have married you," she hissed at me. Her accusation made me burn with fury. She had witnessed my ability before, and it was the drugs she gave me that caused this decline, yet she refused to see her part in it. Rather than facing the issue or supporting me, she did something far worse. She began inviting other men into the house. At first, she did it discreetly, but soon she ceased to care that I was around. I watched, numb with horror, as she led these strangers into our bedroom. She spent hours with them behind closed doors. When I tried to protest, she sneered, "Well, if you can't do anything, what else am I supposed to do? Give me a